Yo, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to talk about how to beat Drytron. I keep pronouncing it very incorrectly. Some people of you guys have asked how to beat the meta decks, and this is one of the first videos about that, just for you. If you want to see any tips on how to beat any other deck, be sure to let me know in the comment section down below and I can get working right on that. First of all, thank you to Francis and to some for giving me tips on how to beat their decks, which is really nice of them. I have a Drytron deck profile from the guys as well coming up later this week, showing you how to play the deck 100% correctly in this format. So Drytron is here. It has been here for a couple of weeks now, released in Genesis Impact. This is one of the top decks of the format, being known for its spammability, recursion, graveyard effects. This deck's pretty wild. It's a ritual deck and one that we haven't seen before. The gimmick of the deck works with their monsters that summon themselves when you tribute one of them or a ritual monster, and they abuse Benton, which is a ritual monster that's, when it gets tributes, searches a fairy. So it's kind of a very high value deck. It's really easy to get a lot of pluses and get a lot of bodies on the field. Then they work together with cards like Union Carrier to search out their cool cards, and then most of the time end on the Vanity's Ruler, which is quite insane, or they end on the Herald Link that can negate anything as well. That's only if their end is really good though. But yeah, this deck is really solid, and it's gonna stay here for a while. It actually gets more support in a couple of months, and that is one of the best XYZs that I have ever seen. But it's not there yet. But until then, you do have to know how to play against this deck, because this is definitely one of the top contenders, making a very strong board turn one that can easily just shut you down out of playing completely. And when going second, it can play through quite a lot because of its valuable effects. That summon themselves back, summon others, search more cards, go plus infinitely. Deck is quite insane. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is what you should stop, or what is semi-important to stop. Because these decks, they all have like their level 1 monsters, attribute a other Drytron or a ritual, and then they do something. But they are not all as important as each other. The number 1 card that you should definitely stop is Drytron Zeta. Drytron Zeta has the effect that you tribute another Drytron or ritual monster to summon him, and then you can add a ritual spell. This deck only plays one of their ritual spells. They only play one because they can add it back from the graveyard to their hand, so they only need one. If you stop your Zeta, they should have either hard drawn it, but if they did that, then the Zeta is kind of weird to activate anyway. Or they need to use their field spell, but most of the time their field spell is the very first card they activate. So stopping the Zeta is always a pretty solid and defined way to stop the deck from playing. Because if they don't have access to their one ritual spell, they cannot ritual summon. If they cannot ritual summon, their end void will probably be shit. Just definitely one of the ways to stop the deck. The second most important Drytron monster is definitely Alpha. When Alpha is summoned by its effect, you can search a ritual monster from your deck. This is one of the ways to access Benton, which is one of the most important cards of the deck because it goes plus really easy by just using Drytron effects. So stopping the Alpha when they don't have a ritual monster can be impactful as well, but you always should just focus on the Zeta. But if you have the knowledge that they already have their spell, then this is one of the easy cards to stop after that. And the third defined choke point of this deck is definitely Union Carrier. They abuse Union Carrier's boosting attack together with Dawn Knight to abuse their ritual spell and, you know, summon a Herald or summon a Benton and then go more plus. But if you stop their Union Carrier from resolving, or if you actually make it leave the field, it's quite insane, and it really stops their turn. Of course, if they have like the proper extenders, they can play through that, but that's really difficult to do for the deck. Stopping the Union Carrier is definitely a solid bet as well. It's really interesting though, because cards that are good against this is, for example, Ghost Ogre, but Ghost Ogre really isn't good against the deck in the first place, so, or this meta, so yeah, it's quite difficult. So if you have the option to stop the Union Carrier in one way or another, for example, if you play Gamma, then definitely just Gamma it or Nibiru it. But yeah, it's really difficult. Because the difficult thing about this deck is, this is a very diverse format. It has a lot of, you know, graveyard effects. It has like the virtual world, you have the outlet, you have control decks. The thing is, it is really not that good to main deck hard counters for this deck. Because Droll Knockbird, for example, is a really good card that can stop their turn, but it's really not that good versus Outledge. It's really difficult to properly build your deck to beat this deck, because it's such a wide variety format. You know, for example, Cosmic Cyclone is really good versus Eldritch and versus Virtual World, but it's really terrible versus this deck. One neat interaction though, if you banish their ritual spell, they can never retrieve it, that's fun. But like, that's one of the examples, you know, it's a staple card that you should probably just main at 3, but it's just terrible against this deck, which makes it so interesting. Because it's really difficult to make up ways to, you know, counter this deck. It's really easy to counter a ritual deck when going first, but it's really difficult to counter a ritual deck when going second, and after that having the options to actually win the game. So to make things easy, these are some very good side deck or maybe even main deck options this format to counter this deck. If you're playing a lot against it, then definitely include these cards in your deck. Dimensional Barrier, pretty versatile card this format. Calling Synchro is also pretty good versus Virtual World or XYZ, but Calling Ritual is pretty insane as well. I main decked this at the Extravagance and it really worked out for me. But you do have to get lucky with your matchups, because there are some matchups, like Eldritch, where it's not really that good. With Summon Limit, another, you know, Floodgate, this is going to be kind of a more Floodgate heavy list, because this deck just dies to Floodgates. But Summon Limit definitely stopped this deck in their tracks, just like Virtual World, it also stops Virtual World, which is pretty insane. So definitely a card to look out for. They have Mask of Restrict. This card says that cards cannot be attributed no matter the condition. That's the old text. This card is really good against the deck because of course it's a ritual deck, but also all their monsters tribute for their effects. So this hard stops their turn as well. And two cards that I really like, that I have been playing for a while, is Anti-Spell Fragrance and Imperial Order. And it is of course a ritual deck and this stops their turn completely, but it also really helps that they cannot activate back row removal, like for example Lightning Storm, which is really cool. Because of course if you have a summon limit or if you have a Mask of Restrict, they can just be outed by back row removal. But an Imperial Order or an Anti-Spell is way more hard to remove. Of course they use their monster effects to make a Phoenix, but then you only have to stop one Phoenix and that's their turn. So these cards are really, really effective, just cancelling out spells. And they're also pretty good this format anyway, for decks like Invoked, or even Virtual World plays a lot of spells. And a little bit more niche card is a card like Mind Drain or Soul Drain, where they cannot activate either grave or hand effects. It's just kind of niche, because if you use the one, they can still use the other, you know, there's no card that stops hand and grave effects. So, you know, the graveyard effect is definitely better, because then they, you know, cannot use their Benton, which is one of their key cards. But, yeah, they can still use effects in their hand, and then they can just, you know, extend, and play through it. The last card I wanted to mention is a really, really solid card against this deck, but because it is at 1, it's just not as accessible, which is Called by the Grave. Called by the Grave is definitely one of the MVPs in this deck. If you banish their Benton, their turn is also literally over, because they just lose resources so fast. And you can also just stop their Drytrons at any moment in time, because you can just Called by the Grave them away from the graveyard. But sadly this card is at 1, so I think it should be in your main deck, because it's a really solid card this format. Also against like Eldritch, or even some extent to the Virtual World. But just sadly, it's at 1. This card would have been so solid at 3 this format. And when going second, it's very difficult, because it's not really easy to stop this deck. Of course, people have been maining Troll Lockbird for a while now, but the thing with this deck is if you stop it for one turn, then the next turn they will just kill you anyway. So if you decide to side deck Drone Lockbird or even main deck Drone Lockbird, be sure to have your deck ready and be able to actually OTK. Because for example, in a control deck, it's really not as optimal to use, because it's just better to troll them, then they pass, then you kill them, instead of you troll them, then you pass, and then they still can play. So only troll will not stop this deck, except of course if you can just kill them outright. Then Ash at certain intervals can be good as well. You can negate their spell search or their monster ritual search. But I don't think Ash is that high impact this meta, but I did want to mention it. Hand traps that are good against this though are all 4 graveyard negations, which is Crow, Bell, Skullmeister, and another card called Alive, just a Cycle Reader. Now of course Bell and Skullmeister can negate the effect that would move anything from the grave, or that activate in the grave, Skullmeister's effect. So that negates any Drytron in the grave. Skullmeister also negates Benton. Well, Bell can negate like the ritual spell as well. So these are very solid cards, although limited in their use, because you can only negate one effect, which is debatable if that's good enough. DD Crow can remove Benton when they distribute from the hand so that it doesn't even activate, which is insane. It can also banish their spell card, it can also banish any Drytron card. And I love just a Cycle Reader as a card that was good in, I don't know, 2016 or 2015 against the Teller Knights, I believe it was cited in. This card, you can discard it in either player's turn and banish 2 lights from the grave, which is insane versus this deck. Removing 2 Drytrons will, or Benton and a Drytron, will definitely hinder their recursion, and it will stop their follow-up play. So this card is definitely insane. It's also okay versus Outblick, but that's more, you know, for debate. So this is a card that you can definitely cite if you are certain that you will play against this. Now their end board usually is just a Vanity's Ruler, which can be outed in multiple ways, like Book of Moon, Dark Hole, or Reiki. But the thing is, they also have the Herald Link monster that can negate spells or monster effects or traps. So you do have to be ready for that. So for that we are going to side in or triple Droplets or triple Dark Ruler no more. Either or, if your deck can play Droplet, then definitely do that, because it's a versatile card also when going first. And if you don't have access to Droplet or your deck just isn't good with it, you can definitely just main Dark Ruler no more to clear out their field, mid your own field, and then hope that they cannot play through that in the next turn. So yeah, those are some tips and tricks to beat out Drytron in this meta. Of course, you do have to keep in mind that there are plenty other decks that you have to keep account for, because you can make your deck to counter this deck, but if you are playing against any other rogue strategy, you will probably lose, because cards good against this deck are not that good versus other decks. So yeah, definitely keep that in mind. Do you have any other tips yourself? Be sure to let me know in the comment section down below and share the knowledge with everyone to get rid of the ritual menace of this format. Overall, the deck is a very solid deck, although it's not as scary as people might intend it to be. Mostly because their end board just doesn't consist of like 20 negates or whatever. It's just like a Vanity's Ruler and maybe a Herald, but the Herald is definitely not guaranteed for the deck. And this is one of the reasons people have been coming back to trap decks, because they don't die to Ruler, then you have a better matchup overall. But then again, this deck is very scary when it can just play. It can easily just make OTK, Link Climb into the Nightmares, disrupt your own field. So that's the scary thing with Drawn Lockbird, as I said earlier, is you'll have to kill them, or they can just continue playing the next turn, which is definitely something you should worry about. So yeah, don't forget to let me know in the comment section down below what other decks you want to see get countered, and I will definitely get working on that. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Bye guys.